What if the history we've been celebrating for like 250 years is actually missing half of its cast?
Oh, that is a big question.
Right. Today, we are exploring a completely different way to look at the American story. So if you are joining us, you are in for a serious shift in perspective.
Yeah, we are diving into a really incredible piece of audio recorded on May 6th, 2026.
Yes, exactly. And it's a conversation between a father named Mike Green. He co-founded Common Ground Conversations on Race in America, and his two teenage sons.
Right, Josiah, who's 15, and Caleb, who's 13.
Yeah. And with the 250th anniversary of the United States coming up, he is basically giving them a history lesson. But he uses this very specific tool that completely shatters the traditional myth of the Founding Fathers.
He really does. He teaches them through something called juxtaposition.
Okay, let's unpack this. In the recording, the father actually asks the boys to define juxtaposition first.
And because they are teenagers, they explain it in the most perfectly teenage way imaginable.
It's so good. They say it's like putting two pairs of sneakers side by side to see whose shoes are obviously better.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. You place two things next to each other, and the contrast reveals the truth about both.
Exactly. So the mission of our deep dive today is to take that sneaker test, basically, and apply it to the men who built the nation.
Right. It's such a brilliant pedagogical approach because, usually we learn history as a single, isolated narrative, like a highlight reel.
Yeah, a highlight reel of just the winners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this audio recording forces us to look at the past as a split screen, placing two totally different, conflicting realities side by side.
So the father introduces his sons to the famous five of American history:
Yeah.
George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Abraham Lincoln.
But he does not let them view these men in a vacuum. To make that comparison, though, we first really need to recognize the baseline narrative.
Right. You can't contrast something until you understand the starting point.
Exactly. And the starting point for these famous five is just pure ubiquity. They are everywhere.
They really are. I mean, if you have a wallet nearby, think about what's inside it. Pull out a coin or a bill. Benjamin Franklin is the face of the $100 bill.
Thomas Jefferson is on the $2 bill.
Abraham Lincoln is on the penny. Look at our national parks. They're literally carved into the granite of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, they are quite literally the currency of the country, economically and culturally.
And if you walk around Washington, D.C., you are navigating these massive marble temples dedicated to their memory.
And the father points out to his sons that this permanence, it's very intentional. These aren't just polite tributes. They are a form of historical branding.
Yes. Oh, and there's one detail in this recording that completely blew my mind. George Washington is actually painted on the ceiling of the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C., and the piece is called the Apotheosis of Washington.
Which is a heavy word.
Very.
Okay.
For anyone who doesn't know, apotheosis means deification. It is the literal elevation of a human being to the status of a god.
That is the level of branding we are talking about here.
It's wild. Think of these monuments and dollar bills as the ultimate brand marketing. They sell a very specific, unified concept, which is universal freedom.
Right, the 1776 Declaration of Independence is basically the ultimate marketing copy for that brand.
Exactly. But as Mike Green points out to his sons, we have to look at the fine print. These men fought a war for freedom, but they only believed in freedom for themselves.
What's fascinating here is how the father unpacks the cognitive dissonance of that era. I mean, cognitive dissonance isn't just some academic term here. It was a lived psychological friction.
Right.
These founders were writing these eloquent philosophies about God-given liberty while simultaneously operating forced labor camps.
Which is just staggering when you really sit with it.
It is.
Yeah.
How did they manage that mentally? Well, by convincing themselves that enslaved people just did not qualify for the universal rights they were writing about. It was a conscious exclusion to protect their own economic interest.
But wait, I always hear the argument, and I'm sure you hear it too, that we cannot judge someone like George Washington because he was just, a man of his time.
Oh, the classic excuse.
Right. People say you can't hold an 18th century farmer to a 21st century moral standard. So how does the father address that specific pushback?
Well, that is exactly the myth that juxtaposition destroys. And he tackles it by moving from the brand marketing of these founders to the actual split screen.
Okay.
He asks his sons to compare George Washington and Thomas Jefferson not to modern standards, but to Black individuals who were living, breathing, and thinking at that exact same moment in 18th century Virginia.
Ah, so comparing contemporaries. He starts by putting George Washington on one side of the screen and a woman named Ona Judge on the other.
Right.
Ona Judge was an enslaved woman held by the Washingtons, and she eventually escaped to seek her own freedom. She believed in liberty just as fiercely as Washington claimed to.
But her pursuit of it inherently threatened his status as an enslaver.
Exactly. So the father asks the boys, if you had to choose between the beliefs of George Washington and the beliefs of Ona Judge, who do you side with?
And the boys immediately choose Ona.
Without hesitation.
Because when you look at it side by side, Ona Judge's definition of freedom is so much closer to what we actually value today.
Yeah.
The whole man of his time excuse completely falls apart because Ona Judge was also a person of her time.
No.
And she clearly knew slavery was wrong.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The father then moves to Thomas Jefferson, the literal author of the Declaration of Independence, and he juxtaposes him with a man named Benjamin Banneker.
Benjamin Banneker is such an incredible figure.
He really is. Banneker was a free black man, a mathematician, an astronomer, and a clockmaker. He was a true polymath.
And we really need to pause and think about what it meant to achieve the status of a polymath as a black man in the late 1700s.
Right.
He was living in a system entirely designed to keep people who looked like him illiterate and subjugated.
Yeah, but Banneker was so brilliant that he was actually hired to help survey the original borders of Washington, D.C.
He was literally mapping out the capital of the new republic.
Wow.
But the real crux of this juxtaposition is a letter that Banneker wrote directly to Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, this letter is amazing.
It is. He called Jefferson out, explicitly pointing out the blinding hypocrisy of writing that all men are created equal while actively owning human beings.
Banneker was a contemporary. He was providing real-time, peer-to-peer pushback.
Exactly.
If Banneker was intellectually contributing to the very foundation of the nation's capital, how does that disrupt the historical excuse that the founders were just men of their time?
It completely vaporizes the idea that nobody knew any better back then.
Right.
Banneker sitting right there, looking the same world, reading the same declaration, and telling Jefferson to his face that his actions do not match his words.
And when presented with this matchup, the boys in the recording do exactly what they did with Washington. They choose to side with Benjamin Banneker.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the father is showing his sons that the moral standard of the time had already evolved. The ideas of true equality existed.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of those in power actively choosing to suppress those ideas to maintain their wealth and their influence.
So it's one thing to have individual philosophical hypocrisy, right? But how did these exclusionary ideas actually get locked into the machinery of the government itself?
Right, the transition from personal to institutional.
Exactly. The father takes the lesson there next. And that brings us to the next juxtaposition. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin versus their contemporaries.
We are moving into how inequality was legally codified. So John Adams was the first vice president and the second president. But his most significant contribution here is writing the 1780 Constitution of Massachusetts.
Okay.
This is crucial because it was the first state constitution on the continent, and it served as the direct template for the United States Constitution.
See, I always thought the Constitution was this universal blueprint for democracy. But the audio points out that Adams essentially wrote the literal code for inequality.
He absolutely did.
That 1780 document explicitly laid out who could control the state and who could run for office, restricting that power entirely to white, Christian, male landowners.
Right. It wasn't just some oversight. It was an intentional filtering mechanism.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. A mechanism designed to keep wealth and political power insulated. And to highlight the resistance to this, the father juxtaposes John Adams with Paul Cuffe.
Okay, tell us about him.
Cuffe was a black man living in Massachusetts during this exact period. He was a highly successful ship owner who sailed to the African continent. And he didn't just accept Adams's legal framework.
I would imagine not.
No. Cuffe actively advocated for civil rights. He challenged the fact that he was forced to pay taxes while being entirely denied the right to vote.
Taxation without representation.
Precisely.
The very thing the founders went to war over, they were actively doing to Paul Cuffe. And when the father asks the boys who they side with, Adams or Cuffe, they immediately pick Paul Cuffe.
Obviously.
Then we get to Benjamin Franklin. And this part is just staggering. We know Franklin from the $100 bill. In 1783, he was negotiating the peace treaty in Paris that ended the American Revolution.
Right, the Treaty of Paris.
Yes. And during those negotiations, Franklin and the Americans made a very specific demand. They said the British had to return all confiscated property, explicitly including human property.
Meaning the enslaved people who had escaped to British lines.
Right.
We really need to understand the mechanics of why Franklin demanded this. The entire colonial economy was built on the engine of forced labor.
Right.
If the enslaved workforce evaporated, the newly independent American economy would just instantly collapse. Franklin wasn't just being vindictive. He was making a calculated economic demand to preserve the financial foundation of the new country.
So, the father juxtaposes Benjamin Franklin with Sir Guy Carleton. Carleton was a British military officer and the governor of Quebec. When the war ended, Carleton was overseeing about 3,000 Black loyalists in New York. The source notes it's estimated that nearly 100,000 Black people fled to the British side during the war because they wanted freedom.
And we should definitely clarify why the British offered that freedom. It wasn't purely out of moral superiority.
Oh, of course not.
It was a calculated military strategy to cripple the colonial economy we just talked about. If you drain your enemy's labor force, you drain their ability to fight.
That makes total sense.
But regardless of the strategic motive, the practical outcome for those individuals was actual liberation.
So, Benjamin Franklin demands the return of these 3,000 people, and Sir Guy Carleton absolutely refuses.
Wow.
Yeah. He looks at Franklin and essentially says, I gave them my word. He puts those 3,000 people on ships in New York Harbor, sails them to Nova Scotia, and records their names in a ledger called the Book of Negroes to guarantee their free status.
This creates an incredible inversion of the history we are normally taught.
Exactly. So, what does this all mean? We are so conditioned to view the Americans as the ultimate freedom fighters and the British as the oppressive, tyrannical empire.
Right.
But in this specific split screen, for those 3,000 Black loyalists, the British military officer is the one actually delivering liberty. Meanwhile, Benjamin Franklin, the American icon of enlightenment, is demanding their return to chains. The irony is completely overwhelming.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this also changes the geography of freedom at the birth of the nation.
Oh, so?
Well, the father asks his sons about the Underground Railroad, and they know that later on, enslaved people sought refuge in Canada.
Oh, wait.
Sir Guy Carleton's actions in 1783 basically laid the groundwork for that. He represents international resistance to American slavery from the very moment the peace treaty was signed.
Wow, I never put that timeline together.
Yeah, and naturally, Josiah and Caleb choose the beliefs of Sir Guy Carleton over Benjamin Franklin.
Which brings us to the inevitable breaking point. The foundation that Adams and Franklin poured was fundamentally cracked from the start.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot build a nation on the promise of universal liberty while running an economy on human bondage. Those two realities were always going to collide. And in the 1860s, they finally did.
The Civil War.
Yes. This takes us to the ultimate crisis and the juxtaposition of the most famous president, Abraham Lincoln, against a radical legislator named Thaddeus Stevens.
This specific comparison completely dismantles how we conventionally celebrate the end of slavery.
It really does.
Look at the mechanics of the timeline here. Lincoln is elected in 1860. The war begins in 1861.
Yeah.
But he does not issue the Emancipation Proclamation until 1863.
Right.
The father imparts a hard truth to his sons. Lincoln's primary objective was preserving the Union. If Lincoln could have maintained the United States by keeping slavery completely intact, he explicitly stated he would have done so.
I always pictured Lincoln as this unrelenting crusader for abolition, but his priority was really just keeping the borders together.
Yeah, the politics of it.
It makes me think of, like, a CEO trying to save a failing company from bankruptcy. Lincoln was willing to do whatever it took to keep the corporation intact, even if it meant looking the other way on the horrific exploitation of the workers.
That's a good way to put it.
But then you look at Thaddeus Stevens. He was elected to Congress in 1858, and he is like the dissenting board member who looks at the CEO and says, no, this company is built on exploitation. We shouldn't just save it. We need to dissolve it, rewrite the bylaws, and build it back the right way.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. Stevens was infuriated by Lincoln's slow, pragmatic approach.
I can imagine.
For Stevens, patching up a broken nation was not the goal. He believed that Black lives were fundamentally equal to white lives.
Which was radical for a white politician at the time.
Yeah. Extremely radical. He didn't just want a technical end to slavery. He actively advocated for full civil rights, along with genuine political and economic empowerment.
Wow.
He was the driving legislative force behind the Freedmen's Bureau and the 14th Amendment, which actually established equal protection under the law.
It's like the difference between someone trying to fix a leaky roof with duct tape just to keep the house standing versus someone demanding they rebuild the foundation because the house is rotten.
Yeah.
Lincoln wanted to save the house. Stevens wanted to rebuild the foundation.
And this raises such a massive question about who we build monuments to. We put Lincoln on the penny. We build him a massive marble temple in D.C. because we praise his political pragmatism.
Right.
But Thaddeus Stevens was advocating for the actual moral truth from day one. He wasn't waiting for public opinion polls to tell him equality was acceptable.
And when the father asks his sons who they side with between Lincoln and Stevens, it's no surprise the boys choose Stevens.
By walking through these historical eras using juxtaposition, Mike Green reveals a hidden, parallel timeline of American history.
Yeah.
There was always an alternative voice. In every generation, there was someone standing right there, pushing back, advocating for the true, universal freedom that the famous founders only pretended to support.
And this brings us to the real takeaway of the audio recording. In every single matchup, from the Revolutionary War all the way to the Civil War, Josiah and Caleb consistently choose the alternative figures.
Every single time.
They side with Ona Judge over George Washington, Benjamin Banneker over Thomas Jefferson, Paul Cuffe over John Adams, Sir Guy Carleton over Benjamin Franklin, and Thaddeus Stevens over Abraham Lincoln.
It just proves that the single-camera version of history we are usually taught is incredibly fragile.
So true.
The moment you introduce a second camera angle, the entire narrative shifts.
Which is exactly why I want you, the listener, to really think about the upcoming 250th anniversary of the United States.
It's going to be everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to see a flood of single-camera narratives. We are going to see endless celebrations of the famous five. But as Mike Green so brilliantly shows his sons, when you pull out that tool of juxtaposition, when you put the founders side by side with the people they marginalized, a stunning truth emerges.
Yeah.
It is actually the alternatives, the ones pushed to the edges of the history books whose ideas most closely align with the modern values we claim to hold today. They were the ones actually fighting for the world we want to live in.
And this raises an important, final, provocative thought. History is famously written by the victors, the people who had the power to mint the currency and paint their own faces onto the ceilings of capitals.
Right.
But if the marginalized dissenting voices of the past were the ones who actually predicted the moral consensus of the future, if we look at our world right now, who are the alternative voices currently being ignored, dismissed, or silenced?
Because 250 years from now, those might just be the people remembered as being on the right side of history. Once you see the split screen, you can just never go back to looking at the picture the same way again.